Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. With host and founder Richard Case and co-host and retreat leader Kathy Ricconi. Today is our special guest day, where we will hear from a friend of the ministry who will share their insight and stories on truth in this chaotic world. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is Guest Thursday, and we have a very special guest, a returning guest, Diane Gomez out of Chicago. Hey, Kathy, by the way, everybody we have on recently is all from Chicago.
Oh, that's interesting, right? It really is.
Casey Mulligan is from Chicago as well. And so, Diane, it's good to have you. I believe you are, since the last time we saw you, you've actually moved, and we're getting to see a little bit of your beautiful new place. Tell us about the move.
That actually occurred a year and a half ago. So
Wow.
when we filmed last time, I was actually here, but barely moved in.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah, so it was a big move after living most of my life, well, at least my life as a single mom in Chicago and living in the same place for 24 years. It was a rather big move orchestrated by the Lord and lots of details, lots of supernatural. Never dreamed of winding up where I'm at, but that's where God has me, and I know it's where I belong.
Yeah. What town is that in now? What's the suburb there?
I'm in Plains. Yeah, I border on a lot of different areas, Park Ridge and Mount Prospect, and a lot of fun towns around me. But I'm deep, right in the downtown of Des Plaines.
Oh, great. Yeah. So that's west of Chicago, and beautiful place. So Diane, we want her to. She's gonna help us understand things about um, Israel, and we'll refer to this again when we get to the end time stuff as well, Diane. So we'll have double duty here. But you've been it's been a great joy for me to see you drawn into the life of Israel by God, which is kind of fun. And you respond to that, and you're a great prayer warrior and intercessor. So we're gonna talk all about that. But Israel and your interest in that is something we really want to explore with our audience, particularly as we then translate that for End Times Friday. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about your journey into really getting connected by God into Israel, and what some of the things have meant to that. So why don't you share a little bit about just how God led you into that?
Okay, there's a long story, but I'll give the short version of the long story. It started actually, God planted seeds when I was a little girl. And just to give a little backdrop, my mother worked for Jewish men. I was in a Catholic school where we were being prepared for Holy Communion at that time. And I remember the nun who was preparing us talked about Jesus being Jewish, which when I think back to it is really odd that would even occur in a Catholic school teaching. But it created a curiosity in my heart, like, okay, if Jesus is Jewish, and my mother's always talking about these Jewish bosses, and I started even as a little girl, 8, 9, 10 years old, I would be reading books in the library about Jewish people. So there was a seed planted that obviously was dormant for many years. Fast forward to how the journey to the assignment to be an intercessor and a messenger for Israel. I think it was back in the maybe 2006, 2007. The Lord started bringing people into my path, people who had a love for Israel, a young man who had just done an extensive internship in Israel, another friend who had spent time in Israel, and we all became friends, and really it set the journey in place for my first trip to Israel. I was supposed to go with this young man, but in the meantime, he met the love of his life, and it was not time for him to travel. And so I thought, well, next year I'll go with a tour group, maybe Chosen People, whatever. And God just really began to work in my heart and say, no, I want you to go now, go at the scheduled time that you were supposed to go, and trust me that, I'll prepare the way. So it was the supernatural. I mean, God just connected me with people in Israel. I put a fleece out to the Lord and, said, okay, if I'm going to go alone, it needs to be all these things. It needs to be in this budget. I want to arrive in Israel during daylight. It has to be in this time frame that was set. Anyway, long story short, it all worked out, and the Lord did the supernatural and provided all of those things.
Oh, beautiful.
So the first trip was like a pilgrimage. Even though I was alone, I met with people at different locations in Bethlehem and Ariel, and did, the tourist thing to the Galilee and Masada and all of that. Spent a whole week just exploring Jerusalem, which was glorious. And it was on the plane ride home, there's that long 10-hour flight coming back, where I was, opening my Bible, reading scripture, and the Lord really led me to Isaiah 62. And as we all know, there's the Logos and the Rhema. And as I was reading in Isaiah 62, the passages from 6 and 7 about the watchman on the wall giving God no peace, praying day and night until Jerusalem becomes the praise of all the earth. And that really, really resonated in my heart. I mean, I began to weep. It was just, the Lord was provoking something in my heart. Obviously, I had no idea at that point where this was all going to, except the deep connection in pondering those scriptures on that journey home was really the connection between, all of Israel, Jerusalem will not be the glory of all the earth until Yeshua returns, until Messiah comes back. And so I began to ponder that and what's involved in Yeshua's coming back, in particular related to Israel and the Jewish people. And God just made it clear, taking me back to Matthew 23, when Jesus wept over Jerusalem and said, I will not return until my people welcome me back. Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And so it kind of set the journey. It really put a fire in me and a passion in me that I didn't understand. In fact, I had, gifts to bring back for family and friends, and every gift had a card. I had prepared cards with that scriptures on it because it was etched in my heart, even though I didn't really understand it. So the journey, it's been ongoing revelation. It didn't all occur to me at one point, other than I did gradually begin to get the gist of it, that I am called to be a watchman on the wall. And I was exploring with the Lord. So what does that mean? And over time, it means a lot in different ways. Part of it is God calling me to start groups and pray with people for Israel. I think the second layer of the understanding came a little bit later, but it's really to be a messenger as well. It's to pray and to be a messenger. And messenger then I began to understand, was someone who is willing to share as the Lord opens opportunities to share God's heart for Israel. And what does that mean related to the end times and the salvation of the Jewish people? So even being on the podcast today, it's like, okay, Lord, you said when you open a door to share, go there. So I know this is part of the assignment.
Yeah. And so as you have been drawn into that place, how many times have you now been over to Israel?
I've been there 3 times. The first time was 2 weeks. The second time was 3 weeks. And each time has had a purpose. And the last time I spent a month in Jerusalem, the Lord really showed me to, as an intercessor, you need to understand the culture a little bit better, and you need to just be immersed there, to be among the Orthodox and to just live there with the people. So I rented an apartment from an Orthodox woman, and I stayed in downtown Jerusalem, right by the light rail and King of Kings congregation and the Shook. And so it was fun. It was just fun to integrate and to be part of it and to just hang out with people.
Yeah.
So,
and as you I know you went over there 3 times, particularly the first time where you were said no, you got to go. You got to go now. Um, what kind of relationships did you wind up connecting to? Because and God was showing you a bunch of things, which we'll talk about, a little bit later. But what kind of relationships did He connect you to? Just because you went on pure faith, um,
Yep.
yeah, with I'm going, and it's going to be an interesting adventure with God. And you didn't have a day-to-day itinerary. um, so what did that feel like and look like, and what kind of relationships did you get connected to there?
Well, it was a little bit surreal because, everything occurred within 6 weeks period of time planning the trip, because that was when Sean and I were supposed to go together. So it all came about really quickly. Um, and God did provide some connections even before I left. There was a man that Sean knew from being in Jerusalem. He was in town, so we had a meeting probably about a month before I left, and he invited me to spend time in Bethlehem with his family, his parents, who are closer to my age. And I had 3 days in Bethlehem with the Ockley family, and was able to experience a little bit of what life is like for Arab Christians.
Mm-hmm.
This is an Arab family, so there was exposure to the other side of the equation and what it's like to live in Jerusalem, and this particular family had no access into Jerusalem because of the way the Oslo Accords were and the dividing line. So when they left the country, they had to go through Jordan. So that was an experience. I was also connected to a family in Ariel, not to get into all the story, but I don't know if you remember, there was a bombing. I guess this was probably about 18 years ago. It was on Purim. There's a Messianic Jewish family that live in Ariel, and their son picked up a basket outside their doorway on Purim. Mom and dad weren't home. He was home with the housekeeper and the dog, and it turned out that the basket was a bomb.
Mm.
And so he was nearly killed. He was airlifted, and they were announcing that he was passing. Well, he's alive and well these days, but after many, 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 many surgeries. So after this, this was probably a year later, I got to spend a few days with them in Ariel. I was able to take the bus through the settlements and come up, because Ariel is 2 hours north of Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
It was a different kind of exposure, and just even at that point, because of what had just happened, and Ami was still quite sick, there was high security around their building. So those were the primary connections on that first trip to Israel.
Yeah.
And the rest was just me kind of like on a pilgrimage, just going to places where the Lord was leading. And, just the things that we all dream about is going onto the Mount of Olives, onto the Temple Mount, and walking from the old city up to those areas, and spending time walking around the old city, spending times at Christ Church, inside the boundaries of the old city, and going up to Mount Zion, spending time there. I mean, it was just, I was overwhelmed during the time, but joyful.
Yeah.
There was just, the weather was beautiful. It never rained while I was there. It rained right after I left.
Beautiful.
Just glorious.
Yeah. And you mentioned, the King of Kings, which I'm very familiar with. There is a great body of believers and Messianic believers in Jerusalem, right there in Jerusalem, and I think you were living really near there. Tell us just a little bit about that particular ministry and what they're up to there in Jerusalem, and of course throughout Israel.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time there on my second trip to Israel, and actually had a wonderful meeting with Wayne Hillsden at that time, just talking about God's assignment on my life and intercession. But King of Kings is strategically planted in downtown Jerusalem. Obviously, they're in a large kind of industrial building, but they're housed on the first level of, well, at least they're the pavilion where they have their services. Hard to describe it. King of Kings congregation has a lot of different ministries under their umbrella. They have counseling ministries and, small groups ministries. One of the fun things that they have in that building, they have a restaurant and it's kosher. So it's fun. I ate there many times, and it's fun because even the Orthodox will come to eat there because it's kosher. So,
Mm-hmm.
and they have food pantry, clothing areas, where people can come and get clothing. So there's just many, many aspects to it. So on that second trip, I did do a little service there and a little service with Chosen People Ministries where I got to meet Holocaust well, families of Holocaust survivors. It wasn't really the Holocaust survivors themselves. And yeah, I worked in the food pantry, the clothing area where they sort through clothes and people come to poor people who are in need. So yeah, it's a beautiful ministry. Obviously, they have lots of prayer and God's using it. I mean, I think He's extending their tent pegs and giving them a lot of influence within that area.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
if you don't mind, because I'm not familiar with King of Kings Ministries, and some of our listeners may not be as well, can you explain a little more who they are? Is that a group of Messianic Jews? Is that a group of Christians that have come in and planted a ministry there to reach Israel? What is their where are they rooted, and how did that develop? Any idea?
Oh yes, yes. I mean, it started about 40 years ago, and Wayne Hillsden, who I have mentioned, is a Canadian Christian non-Jewish who he, along with his wife, and I think at the time they only had a couple of their sons. They have 4 sons. So they were called to Israel, and really it was a connection with other people meeting in small groups. And eventually arose out of there is how King of Kings was birthed gradually
Okay.
over time. It's a messianic congregation. They
Mm-hmm.
do have a Hebrew speaking ministry as well. They meet on Fridays on Shabbat. And King of Kings actually meets on Sundays for their services.
Hmm.
So there's just a lot of aspects to the ministry, but it is a messianic Jewish congregation. And
Okay.
Wayne, who's largely part of the founding community, is not Jewish, but God
Okay.
has used him, and he and his wife, Anne, have been there for, I think, over 40 years and have raised their children there and
Mm-hmm.
have moved on. Wayne was the pastor. He's moved on, and he has a ministry now called Firm. And there's a new pastor who is carrying on the torch.
Right. Yeah. And there's lots of things. The neat thing is that there's lots and lots of um, ministries with the heart of inviting people, teaching people in a healthy way
Mm-hmm.
about Jesus, and is preparing, partly preparing the nation of Israel for their role as we go into the end times. Ultimately, they'll be the beacons of light, and they'll
Mm-hmm.
receive this. So they're seed planting in a big, big way, and just so everybody can maybe consider that it's called King of Kings, and you can look them up online and see their activity, and even donate to them. And then Wayne, who was the pastor of this, um, has trained up other people, and what he's done is called got a ministry called Firm, FIRM, and it's about helping lots of ministries facilitate the work in Israel. And you can look him up and look his ministry up, and also possibly support that, but get exposure to it. And what we would say, and Diane certainly did this, is as you travel there, which we urge people to consider, by the way, just the simple way really going deeper and understanding the Word of God, because you're
Mm-hmm.
physically at the places that are in these stories, and you get to relate to them. But you'll get exposure to really the activity that's going on there, and if you go over, which we urge you to do, look up King of Kings in Jerusalem and look up FIRM Wayne and get exposure to all that they're doing in Israel. And Diane's been a piece of this connectivity to them, and it's been fun. And Diane, as you and we talked about the ministry there that's happening, but you're also now part of a what's called a Messianic Jewish church, where it's Christian. There's Jews there that have come to know Christ, and they have another ministry from now the United States. Tell us about the congregation you've joined there, what they're up to, and then a little bit about what God has asked you to do to kind of serve them and give it away.
Yes. Well, when I moved to Des Plaines, I had started going to one Messianic congregation. Actually, the Messianic churches are called congregations. I'm not really sure why that is, but they're all called congregations versus churches.
Yeah.
So I was going to one, and it was good. Um, I had been there for almost a year, and I began to be restless in my spirit. The Lord was just showing me, don't plant roots here. And it became obvious to me why that was. So just recently, actually over the last few months, I started visiting another Messianic congregation in Deerfield. It's called Adat HaTikva. It's been around for a while, and it's gone through a lot of different transitions. We have a wonderful rabbi. His name is Jacob Rosenberg. He's the born again Jewish, fully Jewish. His parents, who were leading a Messianic congregation in New Jersey, have just retired and moved to the Chicago area. And so they are part of our ministry now. So it's wonderful to have the senior Rosenberg with us, who, brings, with him a wealth of experience and knowledge, and has come alongside of his son. They're taking a period of rest, but then they will be, enmeshed in leading the congregation as well.
Hmm.
But it's been a welcome thing for me, because it's a vibrant community. Holy Spirit's active. There's it's joyful. Some people may frown on this, but last Shabbat, some of the people were so full of joy as the worship was going on that people just began to dance.
That's good. David,
Yeah.
David, David did, so that's good.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a Torah service every Shabbat. And the children lead the Torah service. They lead the procession around the building. And the children, they have a box full of instruments, tambourines and different sorts of.
Mm.
So as the kids come up to lead the procession, they choose their instruments. So they've got flags and tambourines and different things, and they lead the procession as we all have, kiss the Torah and have the Torah service.
Yeah.
So it's alive. There's old people, there's middle age, there's young families with babies and pregnant women, and just the Spirit of the Lord is active and well. And our rabbi, as I've been there and listened to his messages, clearly understands abiding and listening to the Spirit.
Mm.
So it's all a good thing. We have prayer for Israel on Monday, which is beautiful. God actually connected me quickly with people there. On my second visit there, God connected me with a woman who used to be part of the Israel ministry at the International House of Prayer. And it turned out, as we talked, that we know many of the same people in Israel. And so there was immediate connection and an invitation to come alongside and to pray. And I've been invited and connected with a women's group that meets on Tuesdays, and we study the word and we pray for each other. We send our prayer requests ahead of time so that we don't spend a lot of time going around the table, so to speak, and everybody
Mm-hmm.
saying what they need. So we know ahead of time, so we can just lead into prayer and do what we are called to do. So it's all good. I am assimilating gradually. The Lord has just told me to take it easy, that he'll I actually had a prophetic word spoken by intercessors that I pray with on Friday, that I was a gem in the hand of the Lord, but his fingers were covering me, but they were going to gradually be uncovered as he would expose me to different ministries at Adat Hatikva. So right now I'm just slowly integrating and getting to know people and being trained to be a greeter at the door, a good way to get to know people. So that's Adat Hatikva.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, we appreciate your, just setting everything up and telling us your story, how beautiful you've been drawn into connecting to Israel, now to a Messianic congregation. And we'll talk a little bit about, what that looks like in terms of how they see their mission as well as how they see Israel. And then we want to get into next time. Specifically, we know that you're a watchman intercessor, and we'd like you to help define for us what does that look like and how should we, who are also called particularly to intercede for Israel, how do we approach that so that we understand biblically and experientially what does that look like in a healthy way of how we are to pray for them. As you know, a lot of people tend to take positions about Israel and then make declarations, and God is trying to get us deeper than that and say, well, why don't you come talk to me about it? So, and we know that you understand that really, really well. So we'd like to talk more about this. So Diane, thank you so much for your beautiful expression today, and we can't wait to hear until we hear the next piece of it. So thank you, and we'll see you next. And so Kathy we'll actually remember to relate this when we go to End Times Friday to have people go back and listen to this so that we can help understand, since
Pull in some discussion on what's going on in Israel.
Israel is the center of what happens in the end. So it's kind of important. So this will be good.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much, Diane, for joining us. And thank you to everyone else. If you have questions for Rich and I or for Diane, as we have these discussions on Israel, be sure to send them in to questions@afjministry.com. And we'll see you next time.
Yep. We'll see you then.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.